thank you very much for coming back from lunch. Hope you had a nice break. And once again, thank you, Dennis. I think he's already outside for the entrepreneurial boot camp. I think it was very, very interesting. What we're going to do now is hold a panel with 4 of these fine individuals who are nice enough to come today and share their experience with non-dilutive funding sources, how they went about securing funding, and what sort of impact it had on their organization. So the way we're going to do it is just we're going to have each one present to you about the company and about the non-dilutive angle aspect to what they've done by way of introduction. So we've got Dan Burnett from Theranova all the way in the end, and when they come up, they will share more about their expertise, etc. We've got Pablo, I'm sorry, I forgot your last name, Viloslada, right, from Bionor. That's a Spanish company, just recently moved out here to the Bay Area. We've also got Michael Allen from Embolics. And finally, Megan Norwell from NanoMR over here. And right now, I'll allow Michael to start with his presentation. And thank you very much, please.
Okay, so my name is Michael Allen. I'm the CEO of a company called Embolics. And first of all, I want to say that I'm here for you to share my experiences in getting non-dilutive financing from the federal government. I'm a serial entrepreneur here in Silicon Valley. This is my 4th company. I've gotten about 6 Phase 1 grants and 3 Phase 2 SBIR grants, and we were just able to get a Phase 1 STTR. Embolics is a startup company, a small company. We are a semi-virtual company in that we have R&D and marketing in-house, but everything else is outsourced. I was in a position a couple of years ago where I was looking for something new. And as the way it happens a lot of the times, I was in a Starbucks and I met a friend who was a physician. And the physician said, you know, you ought to go look at this type of cancer therapy. It's been around for a long time, but, and it should have stellar performance, but it doesn't, and no one really knows why. So I took his advice, and I found that tumor embolization had been around for 50 years. And it had been done from a clinical perspective exactly the same for its entire 50 years of existence. And the technique was fairly clear as to how it works and how it should work. And it's essentially using a catheter to navigate from an external part of your body through an arteries into a vicinity of a tumor and then filling it with microparticles and that elute drug. And 2 things happen. The first thing is that you choke the tumor because the particles embolize the tumor. There's no more blood flow, so it has no more oxygen. And the second thing that happens is that high concentrations of chemo agent are put into the tumor, about 10 times what you see in systemic chemotherapy. And the other great thing about this is that there's very low toxicity. All of the chemo agent is confined to the tumor. All the things that we think of about embolization, or excuse me, standard chemotherapy like losing your hair or getting sick don't occur. So it is a very good procedure. And I agreed with my friend, and it should have very good efficacy. However, what I found was it was very inconsistent. But there are studies that show stellar efficacy. There are controlled clinical trials that demonstrate the clinical efficacy. However, all the studies don't show the same thing, so there are that are contrary. And oncologists look at this as a procedure that's inconsistent, and so As far as referrals, they do refer patients. There's about 300,000 procedures done per year, but there could be many more. And the truth of the matter is no one really knows why. And so what my friend said was, if you could find out why, there may be an opportunity. And so we started looking at this. And we first began to look at, well, what happens? How does this work? And this diagram shows essentially an artery leading to a tumor and a standard microcatheter. And the way it's been done for 50 years is the catheter is put in the vicinity of the tumor, and microparticles are infused. And in a perfect world, all the microparticles go into the tumor. We looked at the literature, we looked at fluid dynamics, computational models, we looked at solid models, we looked at animal studies. And I'll tell you that that's not what's happening. There are branch arteries that are distal to the tumor, and the blood is flowing in the direction of those arteries and out those arteries. And what happens is an inconsistent flow of particles either into the tumor or out these distal arteries that produce non-target target flow. And in the literature, you don't hear about this. And so once we figured out what was going on through this model, we realized that there was a wide variation in how the tumor was receiving these particles, including a possibility that no particles go into the tumor. So an enormous range, and this was consistent with the observations in the clinical studies that had been done. So now that we knew what was happening, the question was, what do we do about it? And so we got seed financing, which is how we found the model, and then we got an STTR grant, and we started to find out how we were going to solve the problem. And we went down a lot of paths that weren't fruitful. But then what we realized was if we control the blood pressure at the tip of the catheter so that we can reduce the pressure by about 30 to 40 millimeters of mercury in the vicinity of the tumor, what happened was we eliminated the non-target flow. And in fact, all the flow was focused into the tumor. And there was a good reason for this, because when we lowered the pressure, the arteries that were not leading into the tumor reversed flow. So we thought we understood this, and then the question was, well, how do we do that? And so with the STTR grant, we started developing a system to do this. It's shown there. It is a microcatheter, so you can imagine the challenge in this. It's less than 1 millimeter in diameter. And we placed a device to reduce blood pressure on the tip. So we feel, and it's fairly clear, that if we are able to get this to work, this is a breakthrough, and we believe it'll be used for many different tumors. So then it came to raising money. We had a good idea, and in my previous companies, I've always used a standard model. I went to VCs on Sand Hill Road, and I know most of them. But what I found out, different from when I started my previous medical device company, there are investment cycles. And it turned out that medical devices right now are pretty close to the bottom of the investment cycle. And valuations are about 4 times less. And of course, this posed a problem. In my former company and the companies before that, I raised $6.1 million in a Series A financing. And what I had was a couple of patents and a prototype that I made in the garage. But that was not going to happen in this case, for 2 reasons. One of them is there was not a lot of venture capital that was interested in funding early stage medical devices. But second, we didn't want to do that. We wouldn't do that because the valuations were low, and we diluted to a point that it wouldn't be worth us taking the time to do this. So we're entrepreneurs. Give us a problem, we'll figure out how to solve it. So started looking at different financing. and looked at what I call non-traditional. And what that means is you get very little capital, you work very hard, and the capital that you get comes in small parts. So we also had to figure out a funding strategy, and the funding strategy is fundamentally based on limiting dilution. And first of all, where do we get capital? And the answer was not the VCs that I was used to getting the capital from. It was ourselves, it was angels, it was friends, families. Small VCs fit into this category because they also are vulnerable to dilution. And then probably the best kind of funding in this scenario are grants because they're completely non-dilutive. So that was part of our strategy. The second thing was we realized that we had to raise money, not in big clumps like I was used to, but incrementally, because what we wanted to do was we wanted to build value as going along and get less dilution. And probably the most difficult thing was realize we had to be able to exit with a very low amount of paid-in equity capital. Because if we didn't do this, the initial investors and the founders, again, would be diluted out. So our strategy was to leverage. So get seed financing. We got an initial seed financing. And with that, we determined the model that I showed you. And then we got an STTR grant during that period. And with that, we started developing the device. And then from the information that we gained through the seed and the STTR, which we're still under that first period, we were able to close a Series A, which we closed in November. And then we applied for another grant. And so the process that we came up with is to use equity financing and grants to move through a process where we would minimize dilution. So as far as a grant strategy, our goal, so we put a plan together, we put a budget together, and we realized that we would need $7 to $10 million in order to get the company commercial and get to being acquisition ready. And so the idea was grants, obviously, that made sense. We're working with FreeMind right now. They're the ones that told us what grants that were appropriate for us to apply for. And the first one we applied for was an STTR, and we have the phase 1. And there's also a phase 2. And then the next grant that we just filed for was an SBIR. And the STTR and the SBIR have about the similar amounts of funding when you put together the phase 1 and phase 2, and it's significant. And the total potential of what we're applying for is about $4 million. So in a plan where you're raising $10 million total, so you would have $8 million of equity capital, $4 million or even $2 million is very significant. So there are positive and negatives, however, for getting grants. I didn't go after grants in every company that I started. This particular company, it makes sense, but others, it didn't make sense. So, but there are a lot of positives. The first positive is probably the most obvious, and that is it's non-dilutive. So it helps the investors, it helps the people that are in the company. The second thing, which is probably just as valuable, is there's a lot of very smart people in the NIH or the National Science Foundation that are looking at these things, and so they do a lot of diligence. And that provides credibility. And it also ends up attracting investors. And so we're not talking about big VCs, but it attracts especially small investors that are very dilution sensitive, but they also don't have the broad resources to do all of the diligence as far as, in particular, the scientific aspects. And one of the biggest things, I think, is that it provides less dilution in your equity rounds that follow the grant. And I'll tell you that when we did our Series A, we prevented or had less dilution than was the entire value of the Phase 1 grant. So the strategy of getting grants and then doing equity financing is a way to reduce dilution. It also reduces risk. It's not only risk in financing that I just talked about, but it's also reducing risk over the long term, because you essentially have a stream of money where you're making constant improvements. And if there's times where you cannot raise equity financing, it'll be a bridge to get enough accomplished so that you can get equity financing. And nothing's certain, but as many of you probably know, equity financing is not easy. And grants, however, while they're not easy either, if you have a good idea, like the one that I showed you, and you're able to write a good grant, you have a pretty good chance of getting this type of funding. Some of the things that you need to know, and some of the perhaps difficulties and challenges, is if you make a decision in your funding strategy to include grants, you have to realize that it takes a lot of work. One of the initial investors in my recent company, who is an angel, a high net worth individual, and when I got the first grant, the STTR, he said, "Wow, free money." And what I'll tell you, it's not free money. It's a tremendous amount of commitment that you need to put into this in order to make it work. Now, even if you get help in the grants, which I suggest you do, you still have to write the grant. And as part of the grant, you have to have a very detailed technical plan, more detailed than you would normally do if you were not getting a grant. You have to think out 12 months, even what materials you're going to buy. So it takes a lot of research. Along with that, you need a budget. If you have an STTR, it's essentially a collaboration with the university. We have a collaboration with UC San Diego. You have to have a legal contract. So you have to work with their legal departments and any other types of arrangements that you need with the organization. You need letters from your customers. In our cases, it was doctors. And you're just starting a company, so you didn't even know any of your customers. So you have to go out, and you have to get to know them and get them to write reference letters. Not just the technology sounds great, I think it's a good idea, but I'm going to buy it. So you're showing that you do have something that's viable from a commercial point of view. And then, once you get the grant, you have to provide regular updates. And I'll tell you, you do a thorough job of figuring out, well, what are you doing, your aims through the project? But what I'll tell you is that's not right. You're going to end up, how can you predict a year later? You have a lot of it correct, but not all of it. So regular communication with your director, you're changing things. Sometimes you have to provide your own capital that you got from equity to do things that you didn't anticipate, but you have to work your way through that. I think another thing that's important to think about, to see if does this fit into your strategic plan of your company, and that is these grants are long term. Their time horizon is very long. It's years. So think about the STTR grant. It takes 6 months roughly initially, so by the time you apply for it, and it gets reviewed, then you have the first phase. It's 12 months, and then there's a space between phase 1 and phase 2, and then it's an 18 months. So this is 3 years. So does that fit into your plan? In our case, it did. And so one of the in this particular company, why it fit in. So finally, some ideas as to how to best achieve funding from the federal government. So this is not a weekend project. It's not something that you can do in evenings. It has to make it a priority. And for me, I put this plan together. We had technical milestones. We had milestones with the customers, research. We also had miles of funding. So this was milestone. So we made it a priority. In making it a priority, you need to have someone in the company that's knowledgeable, that can write the grants, that can do the research to understand how you're going to project this forward over 12 months. The biggest thing, the most important, in my experience with grants, is that you need to write a very clear grant. It needs to be thoughtful. It needs to be thorough. Think about it from the eyes of the reviewer. The reviewer picks this up. They don't know what you're doing. And so you need to be able to explain it to them, why it's important, in a very clear, understandable way. You need to understand what the market is. You need to understand what the technical objectives are. And you also need to have input from customers. So another thing is, so initially your funding is from the NIH, or the National Science Foundation. And I know I think of them as more academic, research-oriented, but they don't fund research projects. These grants are meant to get companies off the ground that are commercial, that are going commercial. So that's what our company was. We were doing this for an investment reason. We want to put products on the market. And so that fit into the criteria. There has to be commercial value. In fact, even in the phase 1, you have to have a commercial plan. You have to understand how you're going to get to market. And then final point is that I would recommend that if you were going to do this, that you get help doing it. I've, through the past, have used consultants here in Silicon Valley to try to help their marginal use, I found. But there are a lot of things in filing a grant. Yes, you're going to have to write it and put the budget together. But that's about half of it. But there are many, many other things. For example, in filing the phase 1 STTR and the phase 1 SBR, which we did, there are 6 government websites that you have to deal with. And I will tell you, I am still totally confused about how to interact with these. Because not only are they used for different things, sometimes there's crossover, you have to do registrations, but the websites themselves are not as intuitive as they could be. So we're working with FreeMinds now, and I'll continue to do that. But you don't have to deal with the websites, really, because they take care of that. You need someone to review the grants. For me, and if you're in a company where you're planning to be successful, I can guarantee you're going to be very, very busy. And in this environment, for me, I need to have things fed to me. And that's what happens. Here's your research strategy, here's the different sections, here's some ideas as to how the content should look. And other things along those lines. So, again, I'm working now with FreeMinds, continue to do that. We plan on filing a number of other grants. And just as a final word, you can get these grants. The odds, if you have a good idea, are very high. I've been fairly successful in getting these, and I think that if you set your goal to do it and you do it in the right way, you have a good chance. So I hope it's been helpful. We're going to have a panel, and then I'll be around after if there's any questions you want to ask me directly. So thanks.
Great, thank you very much. That was very, very informative. Up next, Dan, if you'd like to join us.
Great, thanks. So my story is a little bit different. My background is as a biomedical engineer. I worked at the FDA for a year, and then went on and did my internship at the Mayo Clinic, and started my first company, which was an obesity company, and joined a venture firm right after that for a couple of years, left it to then focused on an incubator. And FreeMind is has been an excellent resource for our incubator because we have a bunch of different technologies we're working on that are all over the map, and they were able to help us come in and help us form a strategy around how to best tackle the grant process. So we have a total of 6 venture-backed companies that we've spun out in the last 6 years, and then we have 5 others that we're incubating still. The venture-backed companies, I list them as venture-backed, but they've been backed by a whole slew of different mechanisms. So the first company, Baranova, has raised about $50 million total. It's raised money from 2 corporates, Allergan Medical and Boston Scientific. It's raised and money from big venture capital. That was my first deal. And that was, at that point I realized it's probably better to avoid the big VC, where they come in and even if it feels like a friendly takeover, it's a hostile takeover essentially from day one. Sequana Medical was my next company. It's a pump for ascites fluid, and it's in Switzerland now. That company took outside of the US venture capital, no grant money there either. EM Kinetics has taken an investment from a corporate, Allergan Medical, a family office, and a group of angel investors. That's still a going concern. Channel Med Systems took in money from family offices, again, Boston Scientific, and angel investors as well. And then the last 2, we ventured out even further and did an equity crowdsourcing deal with an equity crowdsourcing platform called Deal Labs, where they solicited accredited investors, and we were able to raise $3.9 million. The reason we were able to raise the $3.9 million, though, is largely because of the grants that we had received. And one thing you'll hear a lot about is the non-dilutive nature of the grants, but there's also a huge boon associated with the validation that comes with these grants as well. We had 2 phase 1 SBIR grants at that time. We raised the capital, and at the time we also had a score on a phase 2 grant for this company called Consano Medical. And that phase 2 grant is for $1.8 million. We expect a notice of award today or tomorrow or maybe in a year. Actually, probably not a year, but it'll be sometime this month. We applied for it in April, though. So this is the real downside in my mind to the grants. If you have any entrepreneurial sense of urgency, you're going to be tearing your hair out. So at least with the grants, I've learned to throw it over the transom, or more than that, we form a good grant, and in the case of FreeMind, we've formed some great ones. And then be patient, go about the rest of my business and not let it be a distraction. Stop checking ERA Commons once a week. Just let it kind of stew. But, and that's my advice. But using it as a tool, what I've done with our incubator is we've used the grants as a tool, not just for the non-dilutive financing, because my companies are going to need a lot more money than that. Collectively, these venture-backed companies have raised over, I think, about $110 million now. And it's going to be a lot of FreeMind work to get that amount of money from the government. So, but what I've used them for, and have been very successful with so far, is as a source of small amount of non-dilutive capital to do the feasibility work, and then also the validation associated with having a panel of reviewers as erratic as they can be. Having a panel of reviewers sit down and look at the grants has been a real source of comfort for our investors. As a side note too, as a part of getting the second grant, I've been invited to sit on a panel to review SBIR grants, and that's also been very informative. given me more insight into the whole process. So that's my quick presentation.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to be here with you and share our experience. I'm a physician and neurologist by training, and this company, Pioneer, was creating and develop therapies for multiple sclerosis. This is my topic. I have been working for many years. And at a given point, we decided to move in the path to patients by creating this company and proceeding from the preclinical and clinical studies. And here I'm going to explain this transition also from being a company based in Europe, in Spain, to be a company based in the US as well, and how we are dealing with non-dilutive financings. Regarding the company and the project, we are focusing developing therapies, small chemical drugs for this condition, multiple sclerosis and related conditions. And right now we have developed a small molecule which is target this what is called SJK, is a protein which is critical for the survival of neurons. In this process of developing this new therapy for this condition, we have been also try to be innovative in also the clinical development. And in order to do that, we have focused in ophthalmology, because this disease also involves the eye, involves the retina, and we have tools for measuring the efficacy of these drugs through the retina. And this also provides some advantages regarding when we approach VCs, because they love ophthalmology many times, and also when we approach NIH or FDA in other cases, because neuroscience sometimes is very competitive. Ophthalmology, retina diseases are something that they really promote a lot. And during this period of time, the company was created in 2009, and now we are close to start the clinical studies. This company is a spin-off of two research institutions in Barcelona, and now is based here in the Silicon Valley, in Menlo Park. During this period of time, we have been able to raise $5 to $6 million by a combination of investment from mainly business angels, still not the business on the board, and non-dilutive finances, both from our country, Spain, as well as Europe, and now in the US. In this process of developing this program, we must be innovative, because drug development is extremely expensive and financing intensive at the financial level. One of the approaches was to request the orphan drug designation by both FDA here and EMA in Europe, which provides some advantages at many levels in terms of intellectual property, visibility for pharmas, but also at the financial level, because they reduce the regulatory costs as well. Okay. Regarding the grant strategy, at the beginning, the company was created in Spain, and there the country also provides grants. Most of the time, even if they are not dilutive, are in general mainly soft loans that we need to come back with very good conditions. They accept what is called the technical risk. If the project fails, you don't need to come back the money. And this was very helpful for us at the time of building the project for the phase stages in order to develop the chemical studies, the first proof of concept studies. In parallel, the European Commission also is highly involved in promoting collaboration with industry, and right now it's a strong focus, and they always love to have companies involved in European grants. European grants are different to the grants that are provided from NIH. In general, they are a consortium of 10 academic teams and plus 1 or 2 companies. This is non-dilutive funding in the sense that they are really grants. They are highly competitive, but in different way. This is my experience. NIH grants are really focused in science, and European grants are more in, let's call, politics in science, let's say. And you need to fit really well in the call in order to be able to be awarded. We have been coordinating one of these international projects. That one of the good things is that provide access to great scientists in all the European academic institutions. That is a way to bring knowledge and new ideas to the company. The European Commission have different mechanisms in addition to what is more popular, the European grant, but also the what is called the IMI, the Initiative of Medicines, which involve big pharmas as well as biotech companies. And then we have the NIH grant that has been explained before. In general, we have always applied with the support of consultants in Spain with local consultants, here with the help of FreeMind. We can comment then in the panel which is the advantages, but first when you are overdone with many things to do, always any help is welcome. The bureaucracy, the websites, and everything else is important. You need help. I used to write grants by myself at my academic level. This makes a big difference. And also because you receive the feedback, the criticism, at the end, a grant must be perfect, and this is a way to be perfect. In addition to the NIH, which maybe is the most popular thing, our first case of success here has been with the National Multiple Sclerosis Society, and this is a kind of what is called venture philanthropies. This foundation, patient foundation, is interested in curing the patient with the disease and improving the quality of life. And they have realized, they have made analysis years ago, that they have invested a lot of money, maybe $100 million per year in research grants for all the academic institutions. Knowledge about the disease have really moved ahead a lot, but they have not seen really progress in terms of therapy. The therapies we have right now are coming from pharmas that have been developed without their help. And for the reason they have created this fund, the FastForward, which is they use part of the money they have for research, but they manage as a VC, as a venture capitalist. But in this case, they are finalists in the sense that for them what is important is not the money coming back as an investor, but having a drug, a project that is moving ahead to the next step with the possibility of providing a new therapy for a given disease. This is very important. They gave to us a grant which almost $1 million. Negotiation with them was extremely easy. You are used to deal with venture with VCs is really more complex. Here they provide all the facilities in order to go ahead with this grant. Of course, they request some money back, but just in very reasonable terms in order to have additional money for the next project. Regarding the NIH, because we are a company that was creating in Europe, in Spain, and now we are in the process of moving here already, working here, but in order to apply to the NCATS, SBR, and all the other programs that has been explained before, you must prove that at least 50% of your shares are, of the money is coming from here, from the US, which we still not qualify for that. We are in the process, and in the meantime, we have applied to the National Institute of Eye Diseases to several grants. One is R01, which is focused in chemistry, in order to develop a backup program, and there we are going with a collaboration with chemical companies here from Silicon Valley, as well with academic institutions. We submit the grant once, we receive the scores, and now we are resubmitting again, and the quality of the proposal have improved a lot, in this case with the help of FreeMind. And the second grant that we have submitted right now, is still waiting for the results, is a R21, which is more focused in the proof of concept and mechanism of action of our drug in these conditions. In both cases, what is mandatory is to have very good science, very good collaborators. All times the officials from the NIH are very helpful, providing feedback, and they are happy to hear that you are collaborating with the researchers and the top academic centers as well. As I said before, the SBR, we are still not qualified, hopefully to be able to qualify along this year. Just to summarize, what is the impact for our company? for us was key in order to really be able to move this project from the very beginning to the situation of being close to submit INDA and getting approval for clinical studies, meaning that the great thing is money. These days, somebody asked me, VCs asked me, how do you like to have the investment in dollars or euros? And I say, we like to have just money, doesn't matter. And this is again the same. All the money is always very welcome. But in addition, and I think all the other panelists have commented the same thing, is the prestige. We have been evaluated by a foundation which is highly recognized, and the panel and the scientific advisor who are top researchers. Also, when you get an NIH grant, it's the same situation. And this is something that the VCs and as well as pharma really appreciate. Also, in this process of preparing the grants, submitting, reviewing, the quality of science improves, and also you get the feedback from the scientists for the academic institutions, and also in terms of management, having during the process of submission, but also during the follow-up, especially with this foundation, in the case of the National MS Society, they really are going to work with us as external managers in order to follow the project. And of course, you have somebody on top of you, but at the same time, this additional pressure is at the end very helpful in order to move forward to the project. Just to finalize, something is important is to start the process just with time enough, because otherwise it's difficult. And talk with the institution to get or the funding agency that you are planning to apply. And be realistic in terms of plans and budget. And cross your finger. Thank you.
Yeah, so Pablo mentioned euros versus dollars. I would refrain from accepting Russian rubles these days. Great, so now we'll revert to the panel. So I was listening to all the 4 companies, trying to see what they all have in common. Which coincidentally was working with FreeMind, but that's not why we're here. What I really want to try to understand is, what is that, people like to call it the secret sauce, I don't really like that expression, but and kind of philosophical about what wins awards. Dan.
Is this, how do I do this? Because it's on.
Yeah, it's on, yeah.
So I'd gotten a pretty good indication of that in the venture community by working in the venture capital firm and raising a lot of venture money. But I didn't have that in the grant industry. I'm starting to get that now that I've been a reviewer. And I think the main thing is I've learned not to submit grants unless they're firing on all cylinders, unless it's a significant technology, that there's innovation, and that it's work that we can do that is meaningful but digestible. And if you propose too much, I think you end up getting in trouble, and if you don't propose enough, you get in trouble. And then I would say the last thing is the feasibility data is pretty critical. If you can get good feasibility data to show that essentially you've almost already done what you're going to say you're going to do, then that's worked. Those are the grants that we've ended up getting. So.
Completely agree. What I will say in addition is to fit the call, meaning sometimes the calls are coming with some specifications, and it's important to be adapted. Also not.
So you're referring to responsiveness, being responsive to
exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Second, of course, is the quality of science and the preliminary data. Of course, the having also strong, good CV supporting the application, good institutions supporting the application. Being balanced between how much to do, how much money you request, something that is well balanced, and finally that the niche or the solution you are providing is meaningful at the end.
So, Michael, how would you characterize your awards? What was that extra mile that basically brought you over the line to make the award?
I think there's a number of things. One of them that I thought of was they like to see some preliminary work. And so, to typically, in my circumstances, we had done some work prior to submitting the grant. And the idea there, I mean, and you could look at this in multiple ways. If you put too much there, they're going to say, well, gee, you don't need a grant. But in fact, I think that they like to win. So they're like anyone else. They want to fund something where they win and the company does well. And so what I typically do is put some data in there, preliminary data, but gives them some confidence that we can make it. And the other thing is, and I mentioned this in the talk, that I think that some of the success that I've had in getting grants is just in spending a lot of time writing the grant and making it very clear as to what your value is and not complicated. And that, of course, assuming that you have a good idea to start with, because I'm sure they screen out quite a few of them, initially, because the concept is not, in their view, viable.
And Michael, when you talked about valuation, and you had your own stepwise approach about grant, Series A grant, etc. Your gut feeling, I know it's a little hard, but your gut feeling as to the actual numbers. So let's say it's $250,000 SBIR. What does that do to the valuation? Ram in his presentation talked about an 8-year lag that gets you an 8x return. But in the short term, what is your gut feeling that such a grant would provide to the valuation?
Well, I can tell you what we experienced just recently, and so in the grant for us, because a phase 1 in the bigger picture is not a lot of money, but in our Series A financing, which was tough because it's hard to get money for early stage medical devices. It was certainly something that we talked about, and it was more related to the review process and the credibility associated with that. But I think it also depends on your target investors. If you go after VCs that are deep-pocketed, a grant is not going to be that big of a deal. But in our case, we were not focusing on deep-pocketed VCs, and to them, even the $250,000 makes a lot of difference because they're very vulnerable to dilution. So, and as I mentioned, I think that initially when I had the investors for the Series A, they offered a valuation and ended up getting 2 times that. And certainly was selling the grant and some other things, but it certainly, and that's why I said I think we made more in avoiding some dilution based on the grant than the $225,000 that we received.
Fantastic. Bionor is a Spanish company, after all. I personally speak to many European companies, and the first response is, really? We can win US awards, and they're always very, very surprised. And I was really looking to you to see what sort of reactions do you feel you got from the grant you submitted? Is being a Spanish company right now moving to the US, granted, does that affect, do you feel that affects the final product you're able to put forward and how it's accepted?
Yeah, definitely. At the beginning, I was familiar that it was possible, but until really try and getting it's something that you cannot really grasp in detail. But after having this first success with this multiple sclerosis foundation was for us very important in order to get credibility in front of the VCs, also for the pharmas. All the pharmas collaborate. All the pharmas working in this disease also collaborate with the foundation, meaning that is altogether it's a process that really help in the way of making the project more appealing for the next round of investment.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Dan, being a reviewer now, how many grants do you read as a reviewer? I'm just curious.
So it's 7 each cycle, and then it's a mix of the phase 2 and the phase 1s. So I have 3 phase 2s and 4 phase 1s, and I am reviewer 1 on 3 of them.
Okay. And what differentiates them? I'm sure they don't score all the same. Some are better, some are not as good.
Right.
What ticks you off? What do you like in a grant when you read it?
I like to see that they are on a path towards commercialization. I happen to get 2 grants from one group in the same review panel, and they listed their exploits, and one of them was that they had raised $42 million from the government in grants. They'd raised $700,000 in private capital and didn't have a product on the market. So I just gave them 8s across the board.
Really?
Yeah.
How was the science, though?
I don't know. No, I'm kidding. The science was bad too. It was
Well, good.
It was a force-actuated epidural needle, which would take away the pop to let you know that you're in the epidural space, which you need to know when you're doing a spinal tap.
Yeah,
So it just didn't make sense either.
very good. I think we can also take some questions from the audience. Yes, please.
Actually, it seems like Dan had a very good experience with science and technology background, coming and taking a number of companies to forward with VC money versus non-dilutive source of capital.
Yeah.
Could you validate that 8x if you had to switch it around? In other words, can you take one of your government-funded companies to VCs and ask for the same valuation? In other words, if you stay fine with this, how did you capture that valuation? Is it the case?
So, unfortunately, as Michael alluded to, this is sort of a death valley for medical devices right now. So I haven't seen a big uptick in valuations, but I've been able to get deals done, which is the coup in this case, and at decent valuations. My typical valuation for a Series A company is anywhere from 4 to 5 million, and this last company was around a 6 million. It was a 6 million pre-money, and that was because of the grant. So it was a slight uptick, and we raised 4 million, which became a big difference once you added in the option pool. It was the difference between keeping and giving away control of the company. So it was meaningful.
More questions? Yes.
Yeah, the panel gave some great examples of what's needed for grants. I've gotten a number as well. I had a couple of things I wanted to add to build on top of what they said. Real short. One of the things I didn't hear was that to be successful getting a grant, one of the biggest things that I've found is your PI and your PD. Mm-hmm. You really need to have your principal investigator and or your PD be significant, have patents, have PhD, be experts in the field, have a really great track record. Don't even think of trying to water that down or fake that. I think you probably have found that all to be important as well. And the others were asked about being an awardee, how important was that to VCs and angels? What I found with every angel and VC I've ever met or dealt with, that one of the first, second, or third question they'll have is about, have you pursued non-dilutive funding?
No kidding.
Anytime I've said no, I've seen the lights turn off. So, and what I found with that, if people don't want to spend all the administrative time putting it together, you know, how are you going to prove that you've got the chutzpah and the guts and the background to really do what the VC? Because the due diligence is going to be tons of administrative crap as well. So I found that what you need to do to put for a grant builds your muscle, gets you stronger, gets you ready for the next step. You guys feel the same way?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. How many hours do you think you would invest over the course of the year for a non-dilutive funding campaign? Dan, I suspect for you it's a little more because you have quite a few companies going on there.
So it's about, not taking into account the hours required to generate the feasibility data, which I think are required to make it successful. It's anywhere from 60 to 80 hours, it would seem, to write the grant, polish it, make sure you've got all the sections correct, and submit. It was significantly less with FreeMind. I think we ended up 20 to 30 hours of reviewing and writing. So,
great.
I would like to say that in terms of planning, more or less, you need to go a full month with a team, not just fully dedicated to that, but really commit to that.
Mm-hmm.
Even 1 month is not maybe not enough.
Sure. Michael, in your operations, how much time do you invest over the course of the year? Grant preparation.
Well, I mean, grant preparation is, you know, it goes over, for us, a couple-month period prior to filing the grant, and then so it's very intense during those times. What we found in this STTR, as we wrote the grant, maybe we spent a little bit more time than was mentioned. But where I really spent the time was after we got put in the final group, and then all of a sudden we had to get all these contracts in very short periods of time. It was crazy. It was, when I first looked at it, it was not possible. How do you negotiate with the University of California, San Diego in a week and get a contract? That was what we did, and there were 3 or 4 or 5 other things that were just like that. So it is intense, and probably two times. One when you're writing it, another time at some point when you're in the finals.
We're very close to the end now. So the real last, final, absolute, 1-sentence words of wisdom. We'll go through the panel and we'll conclude. Words of wisdom. 1 sentence. Just whoever wants to go first. Let's go first. One last piece of your ultimate piece of advice.
I'll go first.
Yes.
Expect success. Plan that it will be successful.
That's nice. That's nice. Right.
Yeah, I think so too. That you can get these. I think the odds are equal to or better than getting equity financing. So it is worth it in some cases. I mean, if you're raising $50 million, it may not be. But in a case where you're trying to get a company off the ground, it's definitely I think a good option. But again, write a good grant, very clear.
Pablo, last words of wisdom.
Yeah, again, it's good science, planning in advance, preliminary data.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a little bit FreeMind serving, but I would say get help.
Well, I'll tell you what my piece of wisdom would be. To date, we have yet to identify a single grant that was awarded that was not submitted. Submit, 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 and you'll win. With that, we conclude. Thank you very much.